Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Again, this is Talk Cosmos, and I'm Sue Rose Minahan, and tonight is May 16th, and we repeat on this coming Thursday at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the Pacific time, or 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and it will be on the 21st. Tonight, we're talking about the Venus retrograde. It started on May 13th, just a few days ago, and here on the West Coast at 2:45 in the morning, and on the East Coast at 5:45 in the morning, if you're pulling up a chart. And in Europe, if you happen to be listening, it was at 7:44 a.m. I trust I've got that correct, and that would be on... Let's see, I'm confused. You know what? Let's delete that thought because of my notes. It was pretty quick and I had it and I may not have. The point is, it's retrograde everywhere. And what is retrograde? It's an apparent backward motion that the orbit of the planet from Earth's viewpoint appears to be in process. And it is our experience, and it interrupts our perception, that particular transit. It is at 21 degrees, beginning at 21 degrees Gemini, and it will retrograde until June 25th at 5 degrees Gemini. And there is in this path, as we call it, a shadow path, which will extend to previous dates when it first started, which would have been at 5 degrees, which was in April. I think it was the April 25th, and I know no, it wasn't. It was on June 10th or April 10th. Too many dates, too many thoughts. And then it actually extends after the retrograde, it for the third time, covering all this material, not material, but experience, re-experiencing, until the end of July. So it's a very thorough experience that we're all enduring, experiencing, and navigating. And it happens about every year and a half. It's a particular feature of figuring things. So with more of that, we will discuss. And now we're ready for Planet Buzz.
Focusing on planetary ecliptic orbital cycles and planetary pairs called synodic cycles connecting the planets at the same degree that begin our relationship, these are the members of Planet Buzz.
I'm Sue Rose Minahan, host of Talk Cosmos, an evolutionary astrologer and consultant, plus a certified color energy coach. I explore creative expression as an artist, a musician, and write abundantly, stories to poetry. I love investigating mythology's language, philosophizing eternity, and I'm a perpetual student of life, seeing oneness of body, spirit of people, animals, and nature.
And I'm Dr. Laura Tadd. I have a Ph.D. in human science and work as a spiritually oriented psychological astrologer with people around the world. I teach and lecture on astrology both in person and remotely. I have a blog. I have written for the Mountain Astrologer, Celestial Vibes, and Tarot.com. Additionally, I am the educational coordinator for Live Life Resources, an educational nonprofit specializing in resiliency training, education, and research.
And as the ancient Hermetic code reveals,
as below, as above, as above, as below.
Well, there you have it, the whole schmeal of energy, yes? From ancient times to current times. And once again, the cycle of Venus continues. So Dr. Tadd, Laura, I am very glad to have this opportunity once again in this series called Planet Buzz.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be back. And I know we're going to start doing this pretty much once a month going forward. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, that's right. And I'll say immediately to the audience, if you want to get subscribed, it's very simple. Just go to Talk Cosmos, because you'll find out when Planet Buzz or Cosmic Collaboration or the New Beam team and other miscellaneous astrologers. And again, I might say too, if you're interested in contacting one of the guests, such as Dr. Tadd, her Mythic Sky, the link there, rather than finding it, is all at Talk Cosmos under the guests. So that's going to be quite a good schedule here going. Well, this Venus retrograde, as we had both said, it really, once again, is all the re-words. I know I had a bunch and you've got a bunch. Revisit, reorganize, review, recapitulate, like I heard Anne Orderly, the astrologer, say. There's so many redo, it's most fascinating.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I always look at it as sort of, you put the prefix re in front of whatever the archetype is, right? So at the moment, we've got a lot of the sky retrograde, and with this Venus retrograde, with Venus representing what we love and value, what we need to feel secure in the world, all of that is being looked at again, right? We're reassessing, well, what do I really like? Who do I really like, right? What do I really want? That's why often during this period of time, exes show up, or people from our past tend to show up during Venus retrograde periods. Being like, well, that like ex that you've been fantasizing was the one that got away. What happens when they show back up and you realize they're not really who you had attached this ideal to? And you get to finish that up, that karma or that story up in some ways.
It's so true, because really, if our needs aren't being actually authentic for now, it's quite stressful. So it's a necessary pattern, like, what are our old patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a big part of, particularly with Venus retrograde, that I think is always really important to keep in mind is her synodic cycle, right? That what's actually happening astronomically, because she's changing from evening star, where she's been so bright in the sky for the last several months, to morning star, right? In this retrograde cycle, she'll very soon, and a couple on the 25th or so, she'll disappear and we won't see her for a couple weeks.
Yes.
And then reappear as morning star, right? That's what happens with Venus retrograde. Part of the astronomy with Venus retrograde is her shifting from evening star to morning star, right? So, and what that means is that, so when she's evening star, we can see the planet at night, that the sun sets before the planet. And for those who don't know, right? And then when it flips, then you see Venus early in the morning before the sun rises.
Yes.
And so that's part of, I think, particularly with Venus, I think that shifting becomes really part of a key piece of her retrograde cycle, to understand. She's not only invisible when she's retrograde, but
there's so much mythology about
yeah.
that really is demonstrative of understanding some of the characteristics that we're shedding, because every culture had it. There's some, being in the Western traditions, as we are, that our culture seems to accept more. For instance, of like Inanna, who, and not everybody knows of it, but as she descended and just let go of all her possessions, in a sense it was of her values, and then 3 days and then returning.
Descending into the underworld right? And this disappearing. And so, and in astrology, then, we often talk about it as like when Venus is combust in somebody's chart, right? Is that it's within, 5 to 10, some astrologers say 15 degrees away from the sun. And natally, right, that often is this mixed bag for people, because people with Sun conjunct Venus, which would be a combust Venus, tend to be Venusian, right? They're sort of Venus incarnate because they've got a Sun Venus conjunction. But then because the planet, the star, was not visible when they were born, they can struggle to see their own value.
To express and self-esteem, that is so important. It's very true. And combust, I've actually seen that. I mean, perhaps many of you have, but these sun's beams are so brilliant out as it's setting that actually it doesn't have to be setting, but the point is it's happened to be setting at this time that you just literally could hardly see it. You know, it's the radiation out of it. When you go look at because you're quite a sky watcher. I really appreciate that. You bring that into context.
I've got a good view off of my balcony, so it helps.
It's wonderful to know what direction to look out. Like I have a south window too, so that at nighttime here, it's pretty visible. But that's very true. These factors that Venus is emphasizing are because she rules 2 signs.
Yeah.
It would be both the Taurus, which is the second sign, and the 7th sign of Libra. So there's partnerships of Libra, there's many others, but it's self and other, and then the survival and the self and reliance of possessions, of finance.
That are Dorian.
But that self-esteem too is so important to an embodiment. That was another factor I was thinking. Really in a retrograde time, our relationships are so, because it is in, and I didn't finish that sentence, I apologize, but because she's in Gemini, we're communicating to ourself thoughts. Well, I don't know, a lot of times over media these days because we are being isolated. But as we communicate, it's with others, and then it's also with ourselves, and it's embodying ourselves. If we can embody more, that is a real process of connecting to our self-esteem and values,
and I think with it being in Gemini for this retrograde, right, it doesn't always happen, but it happens to be with this one that she's in the same sign for the totality of the retrograde. And so it's this piece, because Gemini is sort of a funky sign for Venus to be in, right? It's a hyper analytical sign, and that's not Venus as an archetype.
Not intimate, not sensual, not close. That's true.
But so it's a lot of this processing of what we value is really going to be a mental process. It's going to be really thinking about, even though it's Venus, thinking about what we value.
Yes, in fact, I'll just jump in, and I've got a note here. Feelings are the vehicle and thoughts are the passenger. So what our attention and emotion, they energize, our manifestation.
Yeah, I think that for sure that's part of that. And that too, because Gemini is one of the really dual signs as an energy, right? And so Gemini on its own is sort of weighing out options just as an archetype. Right? Making a pro and con list is a very sort of Gemini task. And so that then happening with what we value, what we want, some of the things that I think we tend to go over at this time, right, is I mean, what we want that's physical, tactile, like, possessions that we want to have, or, good time to spring clean. A lot of people have been doing that anyway because everybody's stuck at home. So people are going through their closets and getting rid of stuff.
Yeah, making space for new.
And then it's, well, what do you replace it with, if anything?
True.
Do you like that extra space? Did you have more than you needed? And do you actually like having less? Because that gives you more breathing room, potentially.
It's so true. Everything that one owns has a memory or a purpose, or even if it wasn't conscious, it's just a deeper reflection. And so it's interesting that here we are isolated. It's changing somewhat, but still in isolation, looking at what we possess. So rather than going out and accruing more, it's reassessing why and for what function, because Taurus has a lot about purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking too, with bringing the mental part, asking, like, is our communication working?
Mm-hmm.
Like you were bringing up that our past relationships, which as we go back, this particular Venus retrograde, as I was saying, goes back to April, but those other planets, which we know that you made reference to, and I'll just mention Saturn, the outer ones, Saturn and Jupiter, they both went retrograde as of a couple of days ago also, and they go back to February. So that's really, like you were saying, structuring, like Saturn, and re-philosophizing or rethinking our belief systems, and it's all integrated with values. I mean, it seems like such a potent stage that we're going through
I think that it's helping, as challenging as this time has been for so many, that all of this coinciding, or the synchronicity or perfection of the fact that all of this is happening at the same time as what is just happening in the world, is laying the stepping stones, right, to what is the new normal going to look like. Because nothing's going to be the same. It is, and you can't step in the same river twice, but this is sort of at a more extreme level now. And so I think all of this retrograde planets in the sky, and really this year, everything goes retrograde. So things will go direct, but then we get every other planet in the sky will go retrograde at some point this year.
Yep.
And it is this laying a foundation, laying the stepping stones for this new world, whatever that ends up looking like.
I love that idea of stepping stones. And that really goes along with the Gemini. Hermes was the ancient times of the stone marker, use bricks or stones for marking, because it had to do about time and travel and so many parts of that. And as you were saying, stepping stones across the river, because really, or reorganizing, that's another word, our values. Are they in order? Because there's apparent chaos when we need to totally abandon old habits and routines, all of these factors that we're addressing with. It's always such a reflection for me to realize that we're talking in a consistency here, because of the universal experience. So often these archetypes, and yet they still are personalized through one's own lifestyle. Still there's all kinds of factors. Some people have children, some don't. Some work from home already, some don't. Some are, et cetera, et cetera. Some are getting support from work. But the fact is that we're all in some ways needing to find center in this chaos, and it has to do with our values of body and spirit.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a piece of it. And then, if people know their own astrology, it's seeing, okay, well, where are these retrograde planets? Where are they traveling through in one's own chart, right? So what part of their life is getting spotlit during a given transit, during a given, retrograde, is that then how that ends up manifesting has nuance to it, because it's going to impact people differently. So people who have really significant parts of their charts that are in the mutable signs are going to experience this retrograde more intensely, right? So if you have things in Gemini, if you have things in Sag, if you have things in Pisces or Virgo, this will be a more intense experience. That's why not everybody experiences Mercury retrograde in the same way.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. And it is the mutable, which also is just like the word mutable. It's flexible. It shifts, so that for other people that had more fixed energy, in a sense, disruptive, I suppose, because of the fact that there is so much versatility occurring. It thinks this way, you think that way. But yet it is trying to remobilize. It's that working on everything. When I look at the chart, now you're on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
For those folks, Dr. Tadd is on the East Coast, and I, Sue Rose, am on the West Coast. So of course we have 3 hours difference, which means that the planets are still doing the same thing, but where they are in these charts, just like the people's, each individual's, would be different too. So here on the West Coast, it's all on the eastern side of self on the chart, interestingly. And I did not pull up one for the East Coast.
For when she went retrograde?
Yeah, on the 13th, just a couple days ago.
What time was it?
That was at 5:45 a.m. your time.
So then that would still be the eastern, that would still be the left side of the chart.
Oh, okay.
Right? Anything before noon, pretty much.
Okay, yeah, I have the ascendant just 1 degree Pisces right on the beginning, which means Mars is right there.
But so, 3 degrees, it might be a sign and a half different. 3 hours might be, right? So about 2 hours.
Oh, this is true.
About 2 hours a sign.
Thank you. That's right. Honing down from mental. See, that's another thing. Venus is part of Taurus, and it needs to ground. One needs to get away from this mental part. That's like you were saying. It's not always such a immediate sign for Venus to be in, because it is mental and it gets caught up in that part. And that goes back to, I think, the importance here is to use the senses, the sensuality of life, and ground, like reality. Anyway, I'm probably driving that home, which I will repeat in different ways. Yes. But so in a few minutes before our half hour, looking at this chart, Venus is right next to the North Node, meaning she really is asking us to, and Neptune, the great dissolving factor of timelessness, is asking us to really refactor that sense of communication with our values, I'd say.
Yeah. I think that there's a piece of that again, like all of this stacked up shift that was like, oh, the nodes just change signs, which only happens every year and a half or so, right?
Months,
it's like,
right.
It's 18 and a half years around the zodiac. So there's so much that is just shifting really powerfully. And that, again, it's sort of this perfection of this time is the universe is supporting us all to make the most out of this shifting time right? Of what do we value? What do we, if we get to birth, invent, and give birth to a new world,
new paradigm,
what do we want it to look like? Because part of what
Yes.
happens with this retrograde and her becoming visible is she is not visible again until she goes into Cancer.
That is so important. This is absolutely valid, because the whole idea of the evening and the morning star, the morning star of the warrior type of that, bringing your heartfelt desires of just enactment, and by then her long cycle of when she will be this morning star in that point, because she also,
and it really is, to get the orb that you need to have her truly be visible, it's on the solstice. Like it is when you get because you give 10 to 15 degree orb, giving that orb.
Oh yes.
It hits on the solstice. The sun is 0 degrees Cancer to get those orbs.
Yeah.
So that's part of, and Cancer's all about birth. Cancer is the most maternal sign of the zodiac. So there is this birthing of our new values that can come in.
Well, I love that too, because I was just looking at the moon, and then we'll go to a break. But the moon here is in tension with, and in Aquarius, of authenticity. I keep going back. I mean, we can look at it as trauma and genius and etc., but authenticity, it wants the real deal. And it is, as you were saying, the birthing factor, this nurturing part of ourselves, of the intention, or in square, I'm trying to speak liberally for people to follow it, with the modern ruler of Uranus. So, and Uranus is in the Taurian values. Right. So it's just a real good echo here, an echo chamber of saying just what you were bringing attention to for our thoughts. As we had said earlier, what we see is what we get. Well, we shall return with Dr. Tadd, and this is about Venus retrograde, Talk Cosmos, Planet Buzz. Thank you so much.
While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We're currently in the period of Taurus. By leaving a cycle based upon initiation, the energy of Taurus integrates spirit into a solid form of matter that is tangible and physical. It's an earth sign, concerned with self-sufficiency and the values to maintain the strength of a life form throughout its survival.
Would you like to re-empower the desires manifesting your dreams? Come ignite your summer solstice eclipse new moon energies in a Talk Cosmos 2-part online workshop event featuring their very own cosmic collaboration panel on Sunday, June 14th from noon to 2 p.m. and navigate your experience during this current Gemini Venus retrograde period while communicating to your deep self your authentic values. And Monday, June 15th from 5 to 7 p.m. with the Moonbeam team, which includes an experimental ceremonial workshop to release unwanted and worn-out patterns to express the life you desire. To register for this Talk Cosmos online workshop, go to eastwestbookshop.com, click on Online Events, and join Talk Cosmos to redesign your vision.
This is Dawn Glinsky from 6 O'Clock Astrology, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk 1150 AM, where we discuss the meaningfulness of our roots in the stars.
Alternative Talk 1150, online at 1150kknw.com.
Oh, welcome back. This is Talk Cosmos on May 16th, repeated on the 21st. And I am speaking with Dr. Laura Tadd of Mythic Sky, which you can also find at Talk Cosmos. If you forget and want to find out just the guest information. And we're talking about Venus retrograde that started on May 13th and will continue until June 25th, and has a shadow period that dated back till April and will extend all the way through July, where we get this wonderful opportunity every year and a half to really look at our value system. What are they? Are they working? And it's not like that's foreign to us. We've been probably wondering of those various times, but we are addressing it because she is right now in Gemini, which is a communication sign and ruled by Mercury, which is also ruling the nodes. It just recently ingressed or entered Gemini Sagittarius, which it does every year and a half. And we will discover more and more really what that means, just like the ones that we left just a week ago, which finished in North Node in Cancer with the South Node in Capricorn. And who would have thought? I have to keep reminding myself that we would be in a home-based environment such as Cancer is so known for, and processing our own worlds. Well, now things have changed. We're really doing an emphasis on the thinking patterns, but the fact is that Venus wants us to embody things. So I did a little recap there, but Dr. Tadd and I we're talking a little bit about the chart, and we'll probably continue. And who knows where we'll go in this voyage of mental self-value voyage.
Yes. Well, Venus is in Gemini, so.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. You know, I have to mention this. Well, there's two things to mention, but I'll do this. Somebody had a book. We have a little free library out here, and another person was mentioning what a great time to have one because the libraries are shut. Mm-hmm. So people exchange, and I'm not too worried about wearing my gloves, I must say, when I take a book. I'm a real bookaholic. So there was one on Shakespeare's sonnets. Now, I have Shakespeare's books. My grandmother adored him. I had a statue. It was a big feature. But I have not read all of Shakespeare. My mother, on the other hand, knew the stories frontwards and backwards because my grandmother loved him. But this was a sonnet 145, and it brought to me really a thought about Venus and in the sense of our values, because the whole beginning line, and that's how they know one sonnet from the other, I learned, those lips that love's own hand did make, meaning oneself, really, breathes forth the sound that said, I hate. And so it goes on to say that by the end, it's not that long, these sonnets are maybe 12 lines or something, but says it threw away from hate she threw and saved my life, saying, not you. And one could interpret that as saying, oh, she didn't hate me, in other words, the other person, but rather because this is really a business of finding our values, the relationship with self and others, the connections, revaluing them. It's not hating oneself, because that goes back to that idea of self-esteem that's so fundamental and important to shift so that we can build it and
right. Well, I think that's part of that synodic transition from evening star to morning star, right? From a more traditional understanding that Venus's evening star is much more of an internal process.
I love it.
And it's much more active and as morning star, even just in the myths and the archetypes. And so that's part of this. I sort of have tended to think of, well, that's this duality that she has of this Taurus Libra, is that in some ways maybe she's more Taurian as evening star and more Libran as evening star she's more Taurian, and as morning star she's more Libran. And so that's part of that self versus self in relation. It's not just other, it's self and other. It's how are we in relation to other people, right? That's how, like with the seventh house, well, it's not just our partners, it's what do we project onto other people, because it's easier to have somebody else play it out than figure it out for ourselves.
For
with
good or
that.
bad. It's absolutely true. And a good reason, as you had brought in from the very beginning, why during this time past relationships, whether as an ex-person or just some work experience that we have that is current in our thinking and all
Yeah.
of that.
And
Yeah,
even
so
just thinking
true.
about, yeah, it can be people from our past. I was looking up just a little. So the last time she was retrograde in Gemini at almost the exact same degrees was 2012. She went retrograde at 20, almost 24, and got back to 7.5. So it may also be things that happened or began in 2012, May to June 2012, that cycle back around for people.
Gee.
Because that's part of that, the whole thing with astrology is it's cyclical. It doesn't mean it happens identically each time a cycle moves through, but it can have whispers of previous times that it's transverse in the same way.
It is. It's like the spiral of life, which again and again, that form of creation comes through. But this identification reminding us right now, Laura, Dr. Tadd, that 2012, because universally, in many ways, that was a shift of some consciousness. I know that for myself, I happened to visit Guatemala and Tikal. It was supposed to be when the calendar ended for the Mayan calendar. And yet, we're right now, in a sense, we're also doing a very abstract, and I say abstract because it's not so concrete. We can't just prove things, but we can prove that the environments are changing, but we can't prove how our thinking is changing necessarily. And that's what I was relating back to, that 2012, in a sense, was like this recalibration of where we've been and going.
Yeah, well, and I do think that I've started to see people's thought processes shift, already, in terms of even politically, right? That there's tides turning, and people that held certain beliefs for the last several years are suddenly saying, maybe not. And being able to witness, environmentally, in terms of just how Mother Earth is rebounding, and what that shows us of like, when we give her a break from humanity for a little while, she recovers pretty fast. All of those photos of aerial shots of, different parts of the world and how polluted they were a year ago to date compared to now. And it's astounding.
Oh, it is wonderful, because really, if we're going to trust, and a lot of self-esteem has to do with trust, can we get the signs and signals from life because we can't know everything. We can't envision every little experience that's happening, but can we trust that we will receive these? And that has to do with our self-esteem, etc. But here we're trusting there for the universe, and we could say that nature, of course, is, which we understand, is largely dictated by the forces of the greater unknown, the universe, and here it is, or however we want to identify, responding, and not just responding as though it's like by itself operating, is what you're saying, rather despite us, which I think really is a big part of all of this, is to put ourselves into a factor. I know I was listening to Mark Jones, the current Mark Jones,
not Mark Edmund Jones,
exactly,
who's no longer alive.
And for those other people, he's a wonderful older astrologer that did so much.
But he probably passed away in the
early years. But Mark Jones of England, and he was bringing back the idea of the levels that Venus is survival conditioning and awareness of the inner heart value level. It grounds for our survival and of course, love and desires. And then Jupiter, sort of attached on a little higher, of faith. And then Neptune, which interesting right now, Venus and Neptune, as I was saying, are in square, their intention, which for good purpose, of higher consciousness, so that we can perhaps shift our smaller viewpoint into the larger viewpoint, and this whole relationship with nature, as you're bringing up.
Right. Well, that Venus, Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, right? That Venus is what we love and value, and is very, in some ways, can be very ego driven, but definite and very tactile and physical world, where Neptune is universal love. It's universal compassion. It's Kuan Yin. It's the Buddha, right? I mean, that's that Neptunian, universal compassion and love. And so it's this more elevated love.
Yes, and does relate really to nature, and the fact that isn't this wonderful that our partner could be with nature, as you were saying, how we treat the earth, that it isn't that we have to plant everything and dictate how it's going to be. If we just let nature be, nature pretty well knows.
Yeah, and I think, to me, I'm a fan of squares. I know most people are, they're challenging, but
I agree.
I spoke at the Astrology Guild in Tucson in February about reframing squares was the title of my talk, and how that the gift of them is they hold the archetypes in check. That they can't, those archetypes, so Venus and Gemini can't be too overly chatty and scattered without deeper meaning, because it collides with the energy of Neptune, with that 90-degree tension.
Oh, I like it. It's like a check and balance system. Supposedly
exactly.
the United States is
that it and conversely, that Neptune in Pisces that could be so dreamy and spacey and just never manifest into anything is forced to communicate because of the Venus and Gemini. Yeah. It has to give words to this universal love and compassion concepts that it's putting out into the world. And so it even though it's an air sign, to a certain degree, there's a concretizing.
Well, yes, and interesting that I found that sonnet, because I was thinking of poetry.
Which is very Neptunian.
Yeah. And at that time, when he wrote it early in the book, he was mentioning about, and it was, let's see, but he was mentioning a little bit, if this ear of corn will be accepted. And in other words, the interpretation of this was that plays at that time weren't really considered literature. How much that's changed since Shakespeare's time. Plays are on Broadway. Everybody knows about one or the other one, or musicals. What with the one we just had that was, a big one. It's skipping my mind, but it was about Hamilton. That's right. And so it's like, that's what we do now. But that's another factor, was that the aesthetics, because Venus is also beauty, and beauty is also part of survival. They found out scientifically, birds get attracted, etc. All these animals and people. It keeps the propagation for survival. But
I think in some ways Venus and Gemini can be the beauty of ideas, the beauty of words, the beauty of communication. That can be part of what we're being asked to revisit is, and two, with that, because there's been so much confusion with what's gone on with this pandemic, and misinformation, or we think this, but then it changes, or it's just ever evolving, that the need to be really careful with what we say.
Oh, yes.
That we're having to reevaluate, Right. If people are going to take what's reported lock, stock, and barrel and not apply critical thinking to it, okay, then you have to be really, really careful in what you say. And that, I think, is part of what we're being asked to explore for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah. And actually, in many ways, it'll continue because the nodes are in Gemini,
Sure.
North Node, and of course, Jupiter. So it is that belief system and the words, that words are things, they're manifestations. There's so many cultures that really work strongly with that. So not to take it lightly, that's so true.
Yeah, but so the value, I think what's different with the retrograde, because I think communication and ideals, yes, that'll be a big focal point with the nodes having switched, but that this idea with the Venus there of the value in what we have to say is what I have.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
that,
Gotcha.
I'll get people ask me, oh, can you predict when I'm going to die? And I don't do that as an astrologer.
No.
Even if I believed I could predict it, I don't know how it's helpful.
Well,
so
exactly. I see.
Unless somebody was given a terminal illness and they were given, 6 months to a year, maybe I would look at it to give them some sense of a timeline because they were terminal. And so, okay. But short of that, I don't go there because what's the value? My first response is it helpful? If it's not helpful, I don't tell the person. And it sort of makes me think of, I'm reading this book right now about it. He was an astrologer in the 1500s in Italy, Jerome Cyrano, I believe. And at one point, he was even an astrologer to Henry VIII. And so he was very prominent. He's also started quantum physics, basically.
Wow.
Really fascinating human being.
Oh, I'm circling
but
that.
part of what I was discovering and reading about him is that he saw in King Edward's chart, who was King Henry VIII's son, that he wouldn't live very long, but he couldn't predict that because the potential political fallout of him predicting that was devastating. And yet he's then discredited for having made a different prediction when the guy dies a year later.
Well, this is an excellent point. I was just, it's reminding me, I just was reading about the ethics or the wisdom of sharing with astrological consultation, but it goes to everything in life. That really, what is the purpose, just really, of what you're saying, of sharing certain information to somebody, because there's certain people that really just want to discover that themselves. They do not want, and if it's not asked for, not to provide it. In other words, we get such an idea of just sharing everything, which brings me to this article that I just saw in the paper yesterday in Seattle Times. Nation and World was a category under the news, of course. Talk likely causes virus transmission. So they're finding that, as they're trying to figure out all the different things about it, and that if the projection that it may dissipate, but that still it can float in the air for 8 to 14 minutes. Well, you consider all the changes that are occurring. Again, we're going back to that mutable idea. It's just the experience that this energy right now is needing to have. So that's what we're dealing with. You could look at it that way. But that really talk, I've never seen any kind of an article that even suggested that. And here we are in a time when either Sagittarius, the South Node, needs to have a voice, and Gemini is the communication. Of course, it could be communication like a cycle pump, but still, it's just on one level, that emphasis. And then we have this situation where we're not gathering, but we do in our close groups. So it goes back to thinking that what you're presenting here, I'm so grateful for, is to really evaluate the purpose of why we talk and express, not to censor it, because there's ways of writing our 3-day pages like Julia Cameron of The Artist Way suggests every morning, flush it out.
Right.
There's so many methods.
And that can be great internally to like I think morning pages are awesome. I recommend them to clients all the time. But that what we choose to share, right? And then that goes back to her becoming morning star, if that's more of the Libran expression, is okay, really being consciously choosing our words, consciously choosing what we share, how we share it. I think that too will be part of this as she's shifting into, and we move through this retrograde. It's like, well, hopefully we'll be shifting into a time where we can do more in person, face-to-face communication. It won't all be virtual. So that, we can, we're revisiting that. It's almost like we're having to go back to, right, I forgot what it was like to really look somebody in the eyes when I spoke with them, because it's been so much time. But yeah, I think that it gets tied into this shift into Morningstar, where she'll be, for the next several months, quite a while before she starts transitioning again.
So I'm glad you brought this up. Linked it together, which again is connections, right? Gemini. It's like connecting these facts, because we can think of this factor, but how does it really link in? And the fact that Venus will be is in retrograde and initiating. That's how Venus initiates a new. Well, I'm thinking of the Venus star point, but the retrograde is very important in that process. And that morning experience, that fresh ignition energy so that there's a whole shift, because the Mayans, it was two different goddesses, and not just the Mayans,
Well, no, yeah, in Greece as well. It was, Morningstar was phosphorus, right? We get the word phosphorescent light. That's all the etymology of light.
Oh boy, I love it.
Being Morningstar.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Tadd. Well, I will bring this moment just to bring up that next Saturday will be the Moonbeam team, and the Moonbeam team speaks of the new moon in Gemini. It'll be the new season. Well, not new season, but the new archetypal period of time that the sun's ingressing, and what energies and what is it that really in this experience that we commonly have as we keep being displayed in so many ways, and the full moon, which is that systematic 2-week progression as the sky evolves. And with these talks about planets, it is really a good experience to get outside and see them in the sky, such as you do, and Gemini Brett, who I take classes from, emphasizes, and so many other astrologers too. It's really part of our system.
And you've got about 9 days before Venus will disappear. So from what I was, the 25th.
Oh boy.
Is when we'll not be able to see her again until sort of the end of June. So if you're going to get out and try to see Venus, you got to do it next week, or you got to wait till June.
Yeah, and spring is a great time. I was just noticing some of these values that I've seen in the paper, like bird watching soars among bored Americans. Just getting out there, isn't that a perfect symbolism of Gemini and of beauty and nature, Taurus, everything. I think the world is managing to re-identify our in enjoying nature in some way, and
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think hopefully that will be part of what comes out of this. I'm very grateful that I live somewhere where I've got a lot of nature around me, though, because everybody's having distance, there's, more animals out that maybe I don't want around.
Well, it is discernment, isn't it? Yes. So as we communicate, and I guess that's part of it. We have about half a minute here, Laura, Dr. Tadd. And so that's an interesting factor to
But, coyotes walking through downtown San Francisco.
Oh boy, I'd like to see that actually. Well, I want to thank Dr. Laura Tadd of Mythic Sky, part of Planet Buzz, very much for talking about the Venus retrograde. And I wish all of you there, wherever you're focusing on your sky and your early Venus in the morning, that's about half an hour before she rises, the sun rises, you can see her, but later, that'll be later. So right now, get to the sky because it's in the west sky and she's pretty low.
Yeah, because she's going to be invisible pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, we'll check back in June and it will be great pleasure.
Yes. All right. Sounds good.
Till again.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.